Good evening all, and welcome. Cults can be pretty intimidating, brain-controlling, and overall horrifying, as you're about to find out. If you are thinking of joining a cult, maybe after listening to this you might think again. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This happened to me a while back when I decided to go on another camping trip alone. I always liked camping alone. There's something serene and sobering about being isolated in the middle of the wilderness, and I always found it relaxing. So I planned out what trail I was going to take, packed my camping gear and a firearm for protection, and jumped into my truck. I get to this trail early in the morning and hike about 15 to 20 miles in until I find the right spot, and head off the trail to find a place to put my tent up. I stumble upon this nice-sized clearing and decide that it's a nice, beautiful spot to settle down. I'm exhausted at this point, but set up the tent at the southernmost edge of the clearing next to the tree line and manage to get a fire going. I roast some weenies and start to hear a sound in the distance underneath all the forest noise. It sounded like an animal, mostly like a deer with some lame leg, as it sounded like the animal was making a walking, dragging noise. I felt bad for the poor guy, but it was too far away and too dark, so I couldn't really go find it to put it out of its misery. Thinking nothing of it after that, and about to go eat my food. After I eat, I douse the fire and crawl into my tent and insert myself into my sleeping bag, and I decide that even at my exhausted and relaxed state I can't go to sleep. So I pull out a book I brought with me and start to read by the light of my lamp. Hours go by, then I hear that sound again, this time closer, right at the opposite side of the clearing. Surprised, I put my book down and listen to this animal drag across the clearing towards my tent. It's really loud at this point, and it now sounds like the hooves are all being heavily planted, with the dragging noise following seconds after, like the deer is dragging something along. It makes it to what I assume is about the middle of the clearing, and stops. I hear nothing. No breathing. I mean, not a sound from this animal. I unzip the tent and look into the clearing. There's nothing but trees and darkness. What the hell? Unnerved at this point, I zip the tent back up and sit there listening for other noises. Nothing. Just the crickets and the breeze. And I decide that there are a lot of strange noises in the woods and try not to let it bother me. Besides, I had my firearm. I start to doze off when I hear men's laughter off in the distance to my right, then women's laughter and sticks snapping far off to the left. I'm up now, wondering what I am hearing, if it's real, and if it's just a product of me being half asleep. I hear more faint laughing from a couple of other directions, all different, old men, old women, and even children. And that confirms it's real. The noises are closing in. I grab my rifle, preparing to fire a warning shot in the air in case they come too close. Something about this laughter, how far in I was, the noise earlier, and the time of night told me that this was not just another family strolling through the woods. I was on edge enough already. But then I noticed that the wildlife was now dead quiet. Not even the wind was making a noise. I decided enough was enough. I unzipped the tent and fired a shot into the night. I sat there and surveyed the tree line, saw nothing, and listened intensely to my surroundings. No laughing and the forest sounds had returned. Relaxing just a bit, and figuring that I'd scared whatever the hell that was off, I sat down in my exhausted state and fell asleep. I wake up later in a cold sweat, racked with anxiety, and it was still dark outside. I immediately hear two people whispering not too far from my tent. Alert, I grab my firearm and listen to what they're saying. I can't make out much, but I hear something about being lost, so I shout, "Hey, who's there?" The voices fall silent again, so I shout out, "Are you guys lost? Who's there?" Suddenly, a huge burst of flame, like a flamethrower, erupted from the middle of the clearing, which illuminated several silhouettes of people just standing around. In shock, I fire my weapon, blowing a hole in the front of my tent, and it goes dark. Without checking my surroundings, I get up, sprint out of my tent, making a hard left back to where the trail was, and I hiked until sunrise back to my truck, with my head over my shoulders the entire way. I never heard anyone follow me, never saw anyone or anything the whole way, but couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. After that, my enjoyment of camping alone left me, like I left all my gear in the woods that same night. This encounter happened a year ago at my university. I went to college in Illinois, for clarification. Now, I had a class in the late afternoon, and campus was very empty at the time. Most students took classes in the morning. I was the only one walking around campus at the time when two individuals approached me, asking me for some of my time. I'm a polite and well-mannered young woman, and I had some time, so I asked them how I could help. The individuals in question were Asian and dressed a bit controversially for the warmer weather, as this was September in Illinois. They were very friendly and had me sit down at a nearby table so they could explain their beliefs. Inwardly, I groaned and decided to feign interest until I could politely exit. Immediately, they asked me what religion I was. I replied that I was raised Roman Catholic, but no longer identified as such, and proceeded to rant on about how all other Christian religions had it wrong. God was their mother, and humans were once angels that sinned against God, so were condemned to the earth. The way these individuals spoke set me on edge, and I quickly said I had to go because class was starting soon. Here's where it gets a bit creepy. They got up and started to follow me into the lecture hall, still talking about God, the mother, and how they could help me come to the true church. This was a small lecture hall on the edge of campus, and was only used for my class during this time of day. I was half an hour early, so I feared it was just these evangelists and myself in an isolated building. I should also mention this building got very spotty cell reception, so calling the police or campus security would be an issue. I quickly walked to my classroom, determined to lock myself in. Thankfully, my professor was early and saw how disturbed I was and began yelling at my trackers that if they didn't leave, they would call campus security. That frightened them and they took off. My professor used the class phone to reach the student center and have campus security take a statement from me and escort me to my car. I've had other more creepy and harrowing encounters in my life, but something about those two people really disturbed me. It was the fanaticism in their eyes when they were speaking to me that was so frightening. After doing some research, I have discovered that these individuals were most likely from the World Mission Society Church of God. This sect was created in South Korea in the 60s and believes that their founder was Christ. I shared my experience with some friends at a party, and another girl spoke to me saying she has been approached by people saying the same thing. Another girl at the party overheard us and said her roommate had spoken about something similar. A week later, my sorority sister and her girlfriend were also targeted by this group. Since then, no one has seen them on campus. Truly, I have no problem with religion, but there have been accusations of this group being a cult and invading college campuses and speaking to young women in order to grow their numbers. Suffice to say, I was extremely frightened by them. I have since graduated and hope they never return. Thank you for taking the time to listening to my story, and if anyone has had similar encounters, I'd love to hear them. Please feel free to share. This happened when I was around 17 years old, and is still happening now. At 17, I felt lost in the world and stuck in a job I disliked, with work colleagues that didn't like me. This had to do with my accent, as I was quite well spoken, so they thought I was a rich kid. It all started on a Friday after work. The factory I worked in had half day on Fridays, so I would spend the rest of the day wandering around the city I lived in. It had been a tough day of relentless mocking, and I was reaching my breaking point. I went around the city looking for a new job. I visited the police recruitment center, the Army, Navy, and Air Force centers, and even the International Red Cross. I just wanted to get away from it all. After a few hours, I had a bag full of career pamphlets and still no idea what to do with my life. I turned a corner and immediately saw a sign sitting in front of me. I can remember it so vividly. It said, "Free personality test. Are you curious about yourself? Come in." I then looked up at the building, and in a big fancy sign outside it said the Church of Scientology. Now before I continue, yes, I already knew about Scientology. However, I had a morbid curiosity about it. I'd heard all the horror stories and goings-on inside the church, but Tom Cruise was my favorite actor, and he seemed to have his life sorted out pretty good. My famous last words right there. So I went inside. I was immediately greeted by a very nice lady. She asked me how I was doing and what she could do for me today. I asked if I could speak to someone about the church and the personality test. She smiled and said, "I would be happy to. Please take a seat and I will get you someone to speak to." After a minute, I was introduced to an older man called Alan. He was the head of my city's Scientology center. Alan took me to a small room to talk privately. When we entered, I immediately noticed the large picture of L. Ron Hubbard on the wall. We sat down and genially had a nice talk. I told him about how I was unhappy about where my life was going, and told him how I wanted to leave plus all the troubles I was having at work. He seemed genuinely concerned for me and felt like he wanted to help. After a while of talking, I agreed to do the personality test. He gave me the test and left the room, saying to give the test to the receptionist after I had finished. 2 hours later, I was done. No joke, that's really how long it took. It was around 500 questions about anything and everything. I handed it to the receptionist, and she told me it would take some time to process. In the meantime, Alan had told her to take me to their private cinema and show me a film. I thought it was just going to be some old room in the back with a TV on the wall, but no. They did indeed have a private cinema that could seat nearly 50 people and had a very large screen in the front. It did feel a bit weird just being by myself in a cinema owned by Scientology, but I bet that hasn't happened to many people. Or maybe it has. Anyway, I sat down and they played me the film. It was about 30 minutes long and consisted of a narrator explaining those strange feelings you sometimes get, with some mediocre acting following along. I remember a section of how much you doubt yourself, knowing you have locked a door, but going back to check multiple times. At one point the film showed how a past event that happened to your mother while she was pregnant with you could affect your life in a negative way. Example, your mother was sick on a flight, so you're scared of flying. I also vaguely remember something about rotten eggs and how such an event involving them can hurt you. I know it sounds absurd, but in some way the film really made sense to me. When the film was over, I was taken to Alan's office and he told me my results. He told me I was extremely depressed, one of the most unmotivated people he had ever met, lacking cognitive thinking, and I was a waste of talent. Now this made me very upset, but Alan said he could help me. He gave me about 4 books and a DVD, told me to read the books and watch the film before my course. What course? I asked, and Alan explained he'd signed me up to do a course at the center. He convinced me that if I didn't do the course, my life would soon spiral out of control. He made me hand over quite a lot of money for the course and said I would receive an email about the course, which was in a month's time. I left the center, ran home, and immediately started reading the books I was given. This happened all over the weekend. I basically locked myself in my room and did nothing but read and reread those books and watch the DVDs over and over again. Over the next week, I began taking notes about myself and my family. I emailed Alan with questions and concerns and started resenting my mother for my life. I began to think she was the problem, that everything bad that has happened to me was the result of her. I started to treat her badly, swearing at her, and did the best I could to ignore her. When I emailed Alan about my mother, he told me that if she was the catalyst for my problems, then maybe I should consider disconnecting from her. And I took that seriously. I made plans to totally leave her out my life. A week before my course, I developed some kind of God complex towards everyone around me. What I read in those books told me what I could become. I saw everyone in my family as below me. And I really became a truly spiteful person. Just days before my course, I was confronted by my mother and father. They said they were concerned about me, and they searched my room. My dad took out all of my Scientology books and the DVDs. I was outraged. I screamed and cursed at my parents. I said horrible, wicked things to them and told them I was going to leave and how I never wanted to see them again. Hours of arguing back and forth, tears and crying. However, in the end, they did convince me that the church was a bad place. They said if I was so miserable at work, I should have told them, and that is true. To this day, I can't believe I didn't say anything to them. Instead, I went to Scientology. That night, after the arguing had stopped, they sat me down and comforted me. I really couldn't believe it. After the way I had treated them for the past 3 weeks, they still cared. The next day, I emailed Alan and told him I would not be coming back to the church. He quickly got back to me asking why, asking if it was my family and if I was being forced not to go. However, I ignored him. The emails I received in the next few weeks were mad. He told me stuff like I should leave my family now and I could stay at the church. He tried to convince me that it was all because of my mother. He even emailed me to say something along the lines of, he won't be surprised if he read in the papers that I was found dead by taking my own life. I'm very sure he crossed a line there, but I kept ignoring him. The strangest email I got was all in binary code. I used a binary code translator, but it came back as mixed up letters and numbers and none of it made sense. I eventually blocked him. However, it still hasn't stopped. About 2 or 3 times a year, I will get an email from the church. It's either asking how I am or asking about my family. When I get them, I immediately block their email address because they just keep coming. It's always someone new saying they heard about my case and they were worried about me. The whole reason I'm sharing this is because I just got one of these the other day and thought I would make a good warning. Please, I beg of you, do not go to a Church of Scientology center. If they can make me into a spiteful degenerate in just a few hours, then what can they do with a person in a few months or a year? And if you're lost in life, sad or upset, then please talk to your family, friends, or a doctor. When you are down, don't let others make you into a monster. Take it from me. After this event, I got help, and I'm a happy, confident person now. Oh, and Alan, if you're hearing this, you made me into a monster. So for your sake, let's not meet again. I'm a 16-year-old teen at the time, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, attending my first folk festival with a friend and her family. I am a totally naive girl, completely smitten with the whole hippie thing, thinking I'm so evolved and edgy, like everyone else there. Cringe. Dancing, music, attractive people, and an unspoken and assumed kindness, empathy, and trust amongst total strangers. Very anti-establishment and anti-individualistic mind frame, but also anti-stranger danger because love is everywhere and everyone is connected and we are all valued and safe, blah blah blah, you know. I was separated from my friends at the time and walked to the festival from the campground. A tall, slim man in a white robe approached me and started chatting me up. He was weird immediately, but it was also a folk festival. Weird is normal, and normal is weird, and I am an impressionable young girl desperately seeking approval. He told me I was beautiful and asked me where I was from, and I told him a small town an hour away and didn't say the name. He told me he was from the States and that his name was James in the Rain, and handed me his card. In the event that I'd be interested in attending another festival that he put on in his own community. I took the card and carried on. The festival ends, and 4 days after I've been at home. I'm working slicing meat in a deli, and James in the Rain enters the store. He immediately noticed the wristband still on my wrist and says, "You're the young girl from the festival." He continues to talk to me, doesn't buy anything, and even follows me up to the cash register to talk to me about random things while I'm trying to serve another customer. At this point, I'm scared and creeped out and really just want him to leave. He wouldn't leave until I gave him a hug, and I gave him one just so that he would leave me alone. And he left. Later I told my mum what happened. She looked him up on Google and turns out this guy is part of some commune called the Rainbow People, who recruit young women and brainwash them into leaving their families, force them to cut off all ties with their world, and join their community in the mountains. My friend and I were discussing scary things we've seen in the woods, and he told me a story that happened to his friend. So this guy was with 5 of his friends and were spending a few days in a cabin, hunting and trapping. They were not drunk, but had had a few beers to unwind one night. So one of them goes out to the outhouse to use the restroom, and he swears that off in the woods he hears the faint sound of drum beating. So he finishes in the outhouse and goes to the cabin and tells his friends to come check it out. So they all grab their respective weapons and walk out the ridge their cabin was on and down to the hollow behind it and back up the other side. It was a pretty rocky area, so the sound traveled far, and they could all tell that it was just over the hill where the sound was coming from. So 5 of them spread out about 50 feet apart and walk up to the top. They couldn't see down because of all the laurel bush around them. So the 5 of them wait, and one of them sneaked down through it to see what it was. When he got there, he stood and watched for about 30 seconds to a minute, before he turned around and went to his friends as fast as he could, telling them he saw evil and they had to get the hell out of there right now. All he would tell them is that he saw a bunch of naked people dancing around in a circle, chanting in some strange language. He never told them about everything he saw. The guy who told my friend this story was one of the guys who was hunting back then, and didn't ever see what truly happened. My brother-in-law's dad told me this story. In his home country back in the 70s, as he was walking on the street, he was robbed, jumped, and left for dead. He didn't remember what happened once he hit the floor, but remembers waking up in a random home being helped by an older man. The man helping him out identified as a pastor or priest. He was very weak and was told to stay inside the home. It was big enough for him to walk around, but they wanted him to stay inside the room so that he could get better. He would black out at times and fall asleep. On the second day he felt so much better that he wakes up and starts exploring the home. He couldn't see the man, so he randomly kept walking around. He found a hallway, and at the end of the hallway there was a curtain placed on the wall so that it would seem like it was a dead end or a window. He didn't see any natural light coming from the top edge or bottom edge, as one would expect with curtains, so he opened the curtains to reveal a guy in a very bad state. And he saw the room was full of satanic and evil symbols. As soon as he saw that, he ran out the door and left that place. He does recall that when he was blacking out throughout the day, he would hear voices speaking in an unknown language, kind of like what cult members do. He probably would have been next in whatever that cult was planning to do. He was so glad he got away. Back in 2015, I studied abroad in Japan for a semester. I made some great friends during my program, some of which I still chat to this day. I was with my friend Rick in the heart of the Tokyo subway station. He and I are both quite proficient in Japanese, so we were able to find our way around fairly easily. At the time this happened, we were looking at a map and trying to figure out the best route to our next destination. Apparently we looked lost. Rick was pointing on the map and suddenly 2 middle-aged women politely interrupted us. Our following conversation was all in Japanese, but I'm obviously going to share it in English here. The first woman asked if we were lost and if we needed help. Rick replied no, and that we were in fact fine, that we were just trying to get to a particular location, and that we have our route planned out. She replied by saying that we shouldn't take that route. It isn't the best way. Interested in saving time and money, Rick and I inquired about the better route, and this is where it starts to get weird. The woman pointed to a location where we would get off. I thought it was strange because all the stops on the map were marked with a dot. There was clearly no dot where she was pointing to. That stop didn't exist. I gave Rick a look, and his face showed me he understood. While we were trying to figure this out, the woman suddenly says, "Would you like to make some Japanese memories? We can take you there." I thought the phrase was odd, but that they were probably going to recommend a tourist site or something. She pointed at a place on the map that did indeed have a stop, but was over 1 hour away in the middle of nowhere. We said we were all set and just wanted to get to our destination. That's when she said, "Oh, come to the shrine, make some Japanese memories. Come worship Jesus. It would be such a shame to waste this time." The exact phrase used was "mottainai," if you're curious. I thought shrine in the middle of nowhere and Jesus, this doesn't sound good. We indicated with regret that we wouldn't and began to walk away. As we started quickly in the opposite direction, they called after us louder and louder saying, "What a waste. You should come worship Jesus at the shrine. Take pictures, it's such a shame, such a waste." When I returned home to my host mother, I told her about it, and I said I thought they were part of the Japanese New Religion groups, which are fringe religions that have formed in recent times that are usually conglomerates of other religions and usually resemble cults. She gravely agreed. To this day I have no idea what would have happened had we gone. Not that I think logically we would have ever have made that decision. Perhaps they were trying to recruit us to their religion. Maybe they really did just want us to take pictures, which I doubt. Or perhaps there was something more sinister at work. But I will never know because I don't have the slightest idea of what their new religion was. But I can't think of anything good happening at a shrine in the middle of nowhere, with 2 foreigners who were lured out. I got an Airbnb in Fort Worth at what seemed to be a spiritual retreat. We arrived to a padlocked gate with cameras, and the lady who opened the door had no shoes on. Looking around, there was furniture and overgrown shrubbery everywhere. The main house was dilapidated with rotting wood. We went inside and they asked me and my girlfriend to sign waivers. This was the first red flag. We then walked out of the house to where we would be sleeping. While we walked through the compound, we saw other people that seemed somewhat normal, also without shoes. Our bedroom was an old RV near the back of the property. The RV was collapsed at the front, and they had tried to cover it up with a bedsheet. After trying to reason why the situation was okay, me and my girlfriend decided to look around to make sure it wasn't as sketchy as we were making it out to be. During our walk, we saw these long wooden boxes that had strange labels on them. I was getting very cult vibes from the people there as well. Some of them seemed entranced. Then a little girl came up to us with no shoes and started talking to us. The conversation was friendly at first, but then it took a turn. She then said something extremely creepy that horrified both of us. I don't even want to mention the comment. At first I thought she was being sarcastic or joking, but she kept following us and talking about pretty messed up stuff, and that's when we knew we needed to get out of there. I told the lady that me and my girlfriend wanted to get dinner in town, so if she could open the gate for us and let us out without arousing suspicion. Later on, I saw the main guy I met at the Airbnb on the Flat Earth Convention video by All Gas No Brakes on YouTube. Many people may think that the following story isn't true, but I've got my best friend as a witness. The following events happened. This was a few years ago when I was 13. I'm 5'7", weigh about 125 pounds, so I'm on the small side, but usually carry pepper spray and another form of protection with me. I'm embarrassed to say though, in the excitement of exploration with my best friend, I forgot both of these things. I love to explore and travel, especially in places I'm not allowed. So when I moved in, of course, one of the first places I explored were the train tracks. So I had my best friend come over one day to explore the neighborhood with me, and we decided the train tracks were a perfect place to explore. We were walking for an hour or two, but it was still light outside, and we had passed a small neighborhood street, and we felt safe enough. But when I turned around to throw a stick, I saw 5 hooded figures following us about 200 feet away. I tried to pretend I hadn't seen them and calmly told my best friend. We decided to look at them straight on and see what they would do. Once we looked at them, they stopped. So did my friend and I, and we stared at each other for a few seconds. Finally, they made their move. 3 of them went left and 2 of them went right. We heard the sound of loud and fast footsteps, so we finally snapped out of our trance and ran as quickly as we could. We were both cross-country runners, and were being held together by adrenaline, so we were going as fast as we had ever gone. Because I had explored on those same tracks alone a few days ago, I knew that if we ran about half a mile more, we would be on a bridge above another small neighborhood, and we somehow made it. We weren't sure if we were still being followed or not, but out of fear we jumped 10 feet down and kept running deep into the neighborhood until we finally saw other people. Then slowly we walked home, shaking and exhausted. Looking back now, I regret not telling my parents, but I was scared they wouldn't let me go out exploring anymore, and I never went back on those train tracks again. I'm going to take you back to the 1st of October 2019. I'm getting on a train to head home on the afternoon, and the train is nearly full, and probably a few minutes after getting into my seat, a young woman about my age in her early 20s sits next to me, probably due to a lack of space. For the first 30 minutes it's uneventful, with no interaction between us. An elderly couple gets on the train, and she offers up her seat. I offer to do the same so they can both sit together, and the elderly couple thank us for the offer but decline and sit on the stairs. It's a large double-decker train, you see. I get up to go to the bathroom and return a minute later. She has moved to the window seat where I sat and offered it back to me. I said it wasn't necessary, but she moved back to her original spot anyway, and I moved back onto the window seat. She then uses this as a pretense, I think, to start a conversation with me, and complimenting me about my willingness to give up my seat. We then begin to talk about our respective days. Innocuous enough. I was at a conference/convention for my job, and she was heading out to visit family. Claims to have lived in the area in the past. Now, she ends up asking where I'm getting off. I tell her. She says she's also getting off there, and asks how long until we arrive. I give her my guess and tell her I usually don't catch a train myself, so it may not be perfect. We keep talking about relatively innocent stuff. We exchange names. I won't mention names out of respect for her identity regardless. And she eventually asked me where I worked, and I told her that I worked as a computer technician at a school. I told her it was a Catholic school, as an important detail to my role. With that, she uses that as a pretense to talk about religion, and asks if I participate in any religious functions at the school, and tell her that no, I don't actively participate in them, and tell her that I'm religiously agnostic. But I also mention I was raised Catholic and went to a Catholic secondary school. She then claims to have been an agnostic herself a few years ago until she found Jesus and let him into her heart, which she claims helped her a lot with her mental health issues that she was having, as I myself suffer from some conditions. At this point, I'm just curious about her story. I will generally humor anyone. Then I like to hear people's experiences and point of views as long as it's not directly hostile to a group of people. I listen to her harp on about it while she asks me the occasional question about me, like what worries me about life in general, and during this time she gives me a pamphlet. And we continue discussing seemingly innocent conversation about religion until I have to interrupt her as we approach the station we were meant to get off at. She asks to do a prayer on the bottom left image on the front pamphlet, and I oblige her and do it partially out of curiosity as I haven't done one in a long time. Before we part ways, she asks for my email. I tell her and she punches it into her phone. We then hug and part ways, and a few days later I receive an email, basically asking how I was and if I'd read the pamphlet and all the other stuff. After a little digging on the web, I noticed that the website linked in the pamphlet, activated.org, the one that was in the email as well, is affiliated with the Family International, a religious cult that is into some shady stuff. I was just in disbelief and shocked. I'm questioning on whether to reply to her email and quiz her about it. If I do, well, I'm kind of scared. But holy hell, she tried to recruit me into a crazy cult, and I hope I won't cross paths with her again. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I'm actually going to share with you one additional story. This is a story not about a cult, but about an experience that me and my wife had in Japan. Well, I'm pretty sure it wasn't a cult. It's probably more of a scam, but this reminded me of it, and I just thought I'd share this with you as a little bonus. When we went to Japan on December of 2015, I believe, we were visiting a shrine, and there was a guy there who was dressed in all the monk robes with the fancy beads and stuff, and he didn't speak English, and my Japanese is extremely limited, down to just like basic words and phrases really. And he was trying to explain through his really broken English that he was going to give us some special beads and that we needed to give him a donation. So, we were like, okay, donating for like the monks, we're cool with that. So he got out this little piece of paper or little booklet, and on it had the last person that donated, because it was like you can donate whatever you want for these little beads. And we looked, and the piece of paper said something ridiculous, like an obscene amount of yen. I think it must have been over like $500 worth of yen. And the guy, when he did his bow, it was like the lowest bow I've ever seen. It was almost like he was trying to touch your feet. And this guy was tall. He was taller than us. And being a bit intimidated by the numbers in this little booklet, I got out roughly $30 for these 2 beads, which is obviously massively extortionately overpriced. And when we gave him like the $30, he gave us this look like, is that it? Look at the number above you. You want to be giving me hundreds of dollars. It's quite intimidating when someone does that, especially when you can't speak the language in a country where you don't really know anyone. But I didn't give him any more money. I was just like, well, that's all I'm going to give you, bro, which I think is already more than, you deserve for these little beads, but whatever. So he kind of like gave us a begrudging look, gave us our beads, gave us a really low bow and walked off. And we were left there, just standing there, kind of flabbergasted for a moment, thinking, what the hell just happened? And then it hit us both that we just got scammed. So I was pretty pissed. And then, before I think I'm going to try and chase down the guy and to give me back my money, a little Japanese lady comes up to us and in through her broken English just points to the guy and goes, bad, bad, police, police, and starts crossing her arms over her chest, like, like an X saying bad. And she shows me, and she like points to the beads and says, no, too much, like too much money. And she'd obviously witnessed the scam and was like really angry. And then she walks with me up to the guy, the 3 of us go, and he's like halfway trying to scam someone else, and she just starts yelling at him in Japanese. Obviously, I have no idea what she was saying, but it was lovely because she was trying to defend us. And we give back the little bracelets and he gives us back our money. And I know this has nothing to do with horror stories, but just bear in mind, being in a foreign country and, when you're vulnerable like that, where you can't speak it, I think it's a lot easier to get scammed. Funnily enough, last year, we were on a bus in the middle of London, and we saw, obviously not the same guy, but someone doing exactly the same scam in the middle of London. And we were banging on the window of the bus at the people that he was trying to scam, a couple, and like saying, don't buy it, it's a scam. And just as we were doing that, a policewoman comes up to the, monk. I wasn't even sure if he was a monk now, and basically tells him to clear off. And, I don't think she arrests him, but she basically tells him to leave. And he just starts running down the road. So obviously it's not legit. If anyone sees this, bear in mind it's a scam. So maybe I've, in the future you'll see this and know to, not interact with these people. But I just thought it would be a nice little way to end the video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, you know what to do. As always, a huge thanks to my lovely patrons. And if you'd like to be a part of our select Patreon cult, I'm joking, it's not a cult. You can follow the link in the description to get some fancy perks and stuff. Alright then guys, I'm going to end it here. Thanks for listening, for real. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.